In the book of Daniel, we find another verse that can be misunderstood if we do not do the proper exegesis on the 70 years. Since Daniel references Jeremiah, we need to remind ourselves of the ground rules that Jeremiah lays for the 70 years, and not use Daniel to backwards interpret Jeremiah. To review what we've discussed previously, here is the foundation of the 70 years as we found in the book of Jeremiah. First, at Jeremiah chapter 25 verse 11, we find that the 70 years would be a time when Babylon would rule the nations. Second, in verse 12 we find that when the 70 years came to an end, Babylon would be punished. Third, in Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 10, we find that the prophet told those exiled in Nebuchadnezzar's 7th year that when the 70 years granted to Babylon was fulfilled, they would be able to return. The end of the 70 years is related to the return of the exiles, but the return of the exiles do not mark the end of the 70 years. With this foundation in mind, we can now examine how Daniel references the book of Jeremiah in regard to 70 years. Daniel chapter 9 verses 1 and 2 says this: In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, from the offspring of the Medes, who became king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his kingship, I, Daniel, observed in the scrolls the number of the years that it was that were to be fulfilled according to the word of Yahweh to Jeremiah the prophet for the devastation of Jerusalem, 70 years. Does this mean, as 607 proponents teach, that Jeremiah prophesied that Jerusalem would be devastated 70 years? Is this what Daniel is saying? Certainly a surface reading in some translations might lead us toward that interpretation. However, this would contradict the ground rules that we've gleaned from Jeremiah in regard to 70 years. Upon this we can all agree. Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 10 indicates that after the 70 years had been fulfilled in regard to Babylon, the exiles would be brought back to their homeland. These two things are related, but not equal. The 70 years were Babylon's period of dominance as a world power over the nations, including Judah. At the end of the 70 years, Babylon was punished, and this occurred in 539 BC, when the Persians overthrew that nation. Daniel well understood by the change in rulership that according to Jeremiah, the number of years that were to be fulfilled for Babylon had elapsed. God had numbered the days of the Babylonian world power and had brought an end to it. The 70 years had ended. This is what Daniel discerned by reading Jeremiah. Since the 70 years had been fulfilled, why were the Jews still in Babylon? Daniel discerned something else by reading Jeremiah's letter to the exiles, that at the end of the 70 years, their restoration would not be automatic. When the 70 years for Babylon had ended, certain conditions would need to be met first. Notice Jeremiah chapter 29 verses 12 through 14. Then when you call me, and you come and pray to me, then I will listen to you. When you search for me, then you will find me, if you seek with all your heart. And I will let myself be found by you, declares Yahweh. And I will restore your fortunes, and I will gather you from all the nations and from all the places to which I have driven you, declares Yahweh, and I will bring you back to the place from which I deported you. At the end of the 70 years, God would finally listen to their heartfelt prayers to return to Judah. However, this would not happen without sincere prayer, where they repented for any former wrongs and asked for forgiveness. This is also in harmony with Leviticus chapter 26. In order to be restored from exile, they had to confess their guilt and the guilt of their forefathers. And this is exactly what Daniel goes on to do in Daniel chapter 9. He prays on behalf of the Jews as their representative. Then and only then could the desolations upon Jerusalem come to an end. It is helpful to compare how other translators have rendered Daniel 9:2 from the original Hebrew to get a better sense of what Daniel intended. The New American Standard Bible says this: In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of the years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. The Revised Standard Version says this: In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books the number of the years which, according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, must pass before the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. The New Jerusalem Bible says this: In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, was studying the Scriptures, counting over the number of years, as revealed by Yahweh to the prophet Jeremiah, that there were to pass before the desolation of Judah would come to an end, namely 70 years. So according to how these verses are rendered in these translations, it is not that Jerusalem had to be desolated 70 years, but the end of the 70 years of Jeremiah had to expire first, before the desolation upon Jerusalem would come to an end. Daniel was focused on how the end of the 70 years would relate to the ending of the desolation on Jerusalem, not how long the period of Jerusalem's desolation was. The byproduct of the ending of the 70 years for Babylon, the overthrow of Babylon as a world power, opened up the opportunity for the Jews to return, provided again that they meet the conditions of heartfelt repentance. Going back to the above-mentioned translations, some may rightfully ask which translations are correct in rendering this verse into our modern language. And that is a fair question, as oftentimes a verse in ancient Hebrew can be rendered many different ways, some better, some worse. Perhaps in regard to this we could ask, which translation best harmonizes with Jeremiah's description of the 70 years? If we understand what Jeremiah is saying about the 70 years, we will be better equipped to interpret Daniel's reference to Jeremiah. Often, those who teach that Jerusalem was destroyed in 607 BC equate the destruction of Jerusalem to the 70 years. However, what we need to examine is whether the destruction of Jerusalem was inevitable or not during the 70 years, and what God's expectations were for the Jews during the 70-year period for Babylon.